Okay, so I am Paul Eno. This is my son Ben.
Hello.
We are a team. You might have heard us on CBS Radio and ON 1240 AM as the Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. But long before Ben was dreamt of, I was a seminary student and studied for the priesthood. And I got to know Ed and Lorraine Warren in 1972 when I'd written an article, and Lorraine read it, thought it was kind of interesting, called me up, and I went to meet them, and we were friends for a number of years after that. In 1974, in November, I was home from the seminary for what was alleged to be my Thanksgiving vacation. And Lorraine, who was I don't know if she still is, she's almost 90, tremendous cook, invited me down to their place in Monroe, Connecticut for dinner. Well, I never got my dinner because as soon as I got down there, she came leaping out of the door and said, "Are you in a high spiritual state right now?" You know, I mean, that could be iffy when you're 21 years old, even if you are in a seminary. So, well, I don't know. So off we went down to Bridgeport, Connecticut, to a tiny house, the house on Lindley Street. And the name of the book I will show you later on. The characters in this initial part of the case, which was really probably the height of it, were, of course, and Lorraine there, seen in days of yore, and the fellow in the middle is Father William Charbonneau. Four of us ended up in this house on Sunday, late in the morning of this, the 24th of November, 1974. We weren't the only ones there. Now here's what the house actually looked like. That little tiny place right in the middle. Now this has been called, the title of the book that's coming out is The World's Most Haunted House. I mean, the heck with Borley Rectory, I guess. This is going to be the new one. And people often say, you know, how could all this stuff happen? And I'll tell you what happened in such a tiny little bungalow like this. Well, you'd be surprised. So what happened is, because believe it or not, again, the actual situation began several years before this, depending on who you talk to. But what happened was this couple, in their early 40s when I met them, mid-40s, had lost a son to a terminal disease several years before, just before 1972. And then they adopted a little Iroquois girl by the name of Marcia, in 1972, and she moved in. And some strange things started to happen. And as these cases always do, it started slowly. Ever notice that? A little bit of pounding on the wall, a little bit of maybe footsteps. They saw one night a hand, disembodied hand, appear at the window. There were footsteps that were wet on a perfectly dry night. They'd hear a knocking at the door. The window broke from inside in the room, the front room. And here's what the house looked at a little closer to the time. Here are the major things that happened while I was in the house for that 2.5, 3 day period. One of the things that was going on all the time, and you can see how small this place was. You can see that from the exterior picture. In the bathroom there was a tub, and things were constantly falling off the shelves into the tub. The tub was full of cosmetics and stuff, and you know, Mrs. Gooden wasn't exactly a beauty queen, but she apparently took good care of her. All kinds of stuff falling off the shelves into this tub. Marcy, that's the little girl, of course, in the recliner incident. The police witnessed that. And this has been called the most witnessed and the best documented poltergeist case in history. And they might be right about that. The reclining incident here, here was her bedroom. Some of the first incidents occurred in there. Several times a huge chest of drawers flew across the room and smashed into the wall on the other side. The famous burn that Lorraine Warren suffered on her hand that I watched appear on her hand, the blister and everything, I got a recording of that as well. There was someone from one of the radio stations actually caught that whole incident on tape. I don't think it's ever been played before either. This was one of the biggest things for me, the Monday night attack, which I'll get to shortly. This is where my leg was injured. Now, when I first came into the house, Mrs. Gooden wasn't there. A TV had flipped over and smashed her toe. These things can't hurt you. I beg to differ. Here's the famous floating refrigerator. That happened at least 3 times in the presence of at least the minimum was 4 witnesses. Usually they had uniforms on. And that was probably the worst of it there. Here in the this is the Bridgeport Sunday Post, and they were saying, and we were getting called. We went to the Warrens' house. We were getting calls from as far away as Australia, and we were exhausted. We hadn't slept, and Ed came out of the kitchen. I said, "Who was on the phone?" He said, "Oh, it was the devil. We wanted to know what was going on." Because their theory from the beginning was these were demons, and we needed an exorcism in the house. And the blessings, as I say, were not exorcisms. There was a myth that, as a matter of fact, this was reproduced last year in a Bridgeport Patch article on the case, that I performed an exorcism. Well, that's not true. Yeah, my job primarily was to watch the little girl to make sure she wasn't doing any of this stuff herself. Now, guys, as we got there Sunday morning, one of the strangest things I've ever seen is this burn. There were, of course, as usual, full of people. People were coming in and out, press, police. There was a cop about 400 pounds and 8 feet high standing in the kitchen. I was at the kitchen table. Lorraine Warren was here. There was somebody else here. And there was a radio reporter who was doing this recording. And there was a neighbor as well. So there was, and I literally saw this burn. She went, ooh, and well, you'll hear it on the tape. And a white blister, second-degree burn, began to form on her, up near her wrist. So I've never seen that before, spontaneous burn. No one was smoking. There was no source of heat on that table. You know, people were drinking coffee, but that was it. All right, now this was the one that I just described. I was again this very small kitchen, and I was standing by the the sink over here, like right here, and say there was a television, floor model television, and there were plastic flowers on top that would start to move. And Gooden said, well, you know, because he was an old hand at this by this time, he said, oh, that thing's going to go over. You shouldn't just stand too near it, because naturally I didn't listen to him. Bang! The thing goes down. I can't understand why it didn't smash all over the floor. Hit me in the leg right about here. I had a battle scar for this thing. Knocked the little girl and I across the room because she was standing right next to me. And that's what that was about, because it was just, I don't know, it really hurt too. But it wasn't serious enough to go to the hospital, as Mrs. Gooden did. Now here's the weirdest thing I think that happened to me, and it really changed my life, and certainly my theories. Now, this was what I call the Monday night attack. The Warrens had left to go be on television, and I was in the house with Mr. and Mrs. Gooden, the little girl, a neighbor, and John Sopko from the Bridgeport Post. I'll show you in a minute what I was reading, but we began to feel some energy. And before the actual, what I call the attack, Gooden was in the kitchen chanting in Latin what sounded like to me to be the Benedictine funeral mass. What the haze? How does he know that? It was as like he was someone else. And there's a theory on that too. And there was like sort of almost a fog that was forming in the kitchen, because when these, I felt there were 4 entities here. You could almost see gauzy structures, and the reason, because Gooden came back in here, 4 of these things, I felt, came out of Marcy's room. That seemed to be, if you want to use the classic term, the portal. And these weird-looking things, that's what they felt like when I physically tangled with one. They came up right here. I was reading, there's a book I'll show you in a minute. I put Marcy behind me because I was afraid for her. And one of these things came right up to me. You could almost see a gauzy structure. I pushed against it. It pushed back, and I felt bone structure. And people tell me, well, these are spirits. I don't think so. I think we're dealing with something a lot weirder than our primitive 19th century framework often will consider. That's my opinion anyway. The thing got behind me. Everything was electric. The air. I sort of held up a light bulb and would light. Threw her across the room. I said, this is it. I pulled everybody out of the house. Fortunately, the cops had cordoned off the street at both ends. And it started to sleet. This was November. So fortunately, we didn't go out into the middle of this crazy crowd, who, having seen The Exorcist, expected Father Charbonneau or me to come flying out the window at any moment.